Welcome to Riverdale. I'm your host, Bob Barth, and with me on this very special episode, we have president of Berlanti Productions and executive producer of Riverdale, Miss Sarah Schechter.
Archie.
Betty. Veronica.
Jughead.
I'm Cheryl Blossom.
For one shining moment, we were just kids. The bright neon lights of Pops keeping the darkness at bay.
Sarah, thank you so much for sitting down with us.
My pleasure.
Very exciting. So, where are you from originally?
I was born in Boston. I lived there long enough to like the Boston Red Sox, and that's it. And then I grew up in New York City, in Chelsea.
Very nice. And so you grew up in Chelsea. What was the thing that got you into the industry? What was the first bug in your ear?
I mean, I saw E.T. after school every day for a week. Both of my parents loved film, so it was really just going to the movies all the time. And then I was basically raised by the television.
Amazing. Which is, I think that's like a common theme for most people in this industry. You just become obsessed at an early age.
Yeah.
And it never goes away.
Never.
So at what point did you decide to take your obsession and turn it into your livelihood?
I mean, when I was 13, I sort of looked at what I really loved, and I realized I had a terrible voice because I would have loved to have been a rock star, but I can't really sing, and I can only play 2 songs on guitar. And then I realized that I loved film, and so I wanted to do that. I didn't really know what a producer did at that point, so I thought I wanted to be a director. But as time went on and I understood more about the business, and I worked as a PA on various movies, I started to understand what jobs were interesting to me.
And so that leads us to a really important part here. What was the thing that got your foot in the door?
My first job I was a PA for Barbara Koppel.
Right.
It was an incredible Oscar-winning documentarian. And then in New York, they used to have the mayor's office used to put out a list of all of the productions that had gotten permits. So I would just go pick that up and then fax my resume. And so I just got a series of sort of terrible and underpaid PA jobs, but it allowed me to kind of see how movies were made and to realize that so much of the important or the questions that were interesting to me were asked before it was in production. It was sort of like, how did the script end up like this? How did these actors end up in this? And that's sort of when I turned my attention towards producing. Yeah,
so that's really interesting. So you were looking at it you were entertained and you were turned on as a consumer, but you had that functioning mind of how do we make this better? How does it come into being? Which is really the challenge of the industry.
When you're a PA and you're working on a lot of really terrible independent movies, you have plenty of time to ask yourself those questions.
And also, I mean, if you're very, inquisitive, as I imagine you were, you talk to the people who have been there for 20, 30 years before you, and you're just mining them for information.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and then I went to UC Santa Cruz for college. Right. And ended up down in LA. I studied film theory, ended up in LA and didn't really know anyone. It took me forever to find a job. And then you just get an assistant job and you start meeting people and hearing about better jobs and kind of going along that path.
And your path goes steadily upward in a relatively quick amount of time.
You're very kind to say relatively quick. I really appreciate that.
Well, I mean, if you look back to at what point, well, let's talk about this. At what point do we go from being PA assistant to your introduction to Warner Brothers?
Well, I was an executive for Barry Mendel, who had a deal at Universal. I worked for him as an assistant for about 2.5 years, and then as a CE, which is a creative executive, which is sort of like the lowest executive level. And Barry was great. He's now partnered up with Judd Apatow and just produced The Big Sick that was at Sundance. Yeah. And Barry's one other person in Hollywood, I think, who actually went to UC Santa Cruz. So I actually was able to use an alumni connection. But Barry, I worked on Munich for 5 years and did a lot of development, worked on Royal Tenenbaums, worked on Life Aquatic. So that was great. But it was sort of, I was so confused by the studio movies that we had going and why Universal wanted to keep pouring money into this project but wouldn't make that project. And so I sort of thought I would go, Jeff Clifford, who had been my executive at Warner at Disney on the Wes Anderson movies had gone over to Warner. So I went to sit with him and I was like, what should I do? And he said, come be the CE at Warner Brothers. And I sort of thought that sounded terrible and corporate. And then I decided I would do it for a year and a half because it would be my version of going to the Stark program because I didn't have any money to go to the Stark program.
And for the audience, what is the Stark program?
Stark program is like USC, I believe. It's like a graduate producing class. But as far as I can tell, you pay a lot of money to be an intern at different companies. And it's sort of like business school where you don't really study business. It's just you meet people. So I came over to Warner Brothers. It was a very sort of historically, looking back on it, a really intense period of time at Warner Brothers with an intense and really good group of senior executives. And I sort of never thought I'd get promoted. And Jeff Robinoff, who now runs Studio 8, was just awesome to me. And Kevin McCormick was a producer, and Jessica Goodman. And all these people were really kind to me. And I just sort of accidentally kept getting promoted at Warner Brothers. And
like, not accidentally, you're doing something right because you're promoted to major promotions, it looks like, every 2 years.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I had good bosses, and it was what I discovered. What I loved about working at Warner Brothers was I could work on a comedy for half an hour and then a drama. I was going from and you really start to understand why certain movies get made, and understand what the studio needs, what the studio wants, why they make the decisions they make, and it made me a much better producer. But I also remember I would be in like script meetings for 2 hours and my boss would say like, where were you? And I've been working on a script for 2 hours. And he goes, that's a terrible use of your time. And I was sort of like, well, that's actually the best use of my time. And we were both right, because the studio executive part of it is packaging things and kind of throwing them against the wall. And producing is a lot more about what's happening inside of that package. And that was what really interested me. And Greg Berlanti and I made a movie together years ago, and ever since then we'd become friends, and we had a great working relationship. And he just would say, you're a producer. What are you doing there? What are you doing there? And so when I finally was sort of burnt out and realized, like, I have a great job, but I'm not particularly happy. There's a very successful producer who had also been a studio head who once told me that being a studio executive is a great life and a terrible job, and being a producer is a great job and a terrible life. Because when you're a producer, you have to go places, you have to do, you give up your life. But I always knew I wanted to be a producer. So finally, Greg convinced me.
And there is an element of shifting gears, because as an executive producer, you're dealing with products that have already been started by deals that have been made within the company. When you switch over to producer now, you are instrumental in finding these projects and getting them up on their feet.
Yeah, and just to take us straight to Riverdale, but Riverdale I bought as a film executive at Warner Brothers with Jason Moore attached to direct, because I thought, well, God, finally I can make a John Hughes movie. And and then what became clear was, like, the movie business has really shifted, and it's become so much about these giant sort of fireworks encased kind of globally recognized brands. And it's hard. There's like 500 movies get made a year. There's only 52 weekends. I mean, that's a lot of movies fighting for eyeballs. And so they've just, to stand out, the movies have become bigger and bigger and less about people.
Yeah, I mean, we're in your office. Most of these recordings we've done it over at Burbank Studios, but here we are in your bungalow, which I'm sure has an amazing history in and of itself, on the Warner's lot, and across from me, giant Ferris Bueller.
A French
Ferris Bueller poster that is gorgeous. So clearly John Hughes is important to you.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in just to date myself, but I think talking about Riverdale, when I was in high school. I went to boarding school, and you're supposed to be in study hall from 7:30 to 9:30 every night. And I bought a tiny television so I could watch Twin Peaks when it was on weeknights.
Amazing. And
watch 90210. And then I eventually convinced the school to let me open the snack bar on Wednesday nights so that everyone could watch 90210. And then Twin Peaks moved to like Saturdays at 10 p.m. and I used to give myself a 10 p.m. curfew. Just to make sure that I watched it. And so it's sort of really fun to grow up and basically get to put those things in a blender.
Yeah, incredibly fun. So let's get to Riverdale. At what point does Roberto into your life?
Roberto entered my life before Riverdale because I had been working on, and which now I'm still working on because movies take forever. But as an executive, I was the executive that was trying to put together Little Shop of Horrors to remake that in like a modern 3D way.
Love it.
And Roberto came in to write it, and that was when we first met. And he's just such a talented writer and such a visionary person. And so when I left Warner Brothers, I had lunch with Clancy Collins White, who's at Warner Brothers Television, and she was like, "So who do you want to work with?" And somehow Roberto came up, and that was like day one of my new job, and so that became the priority, was to do television with Roberto.
Amazing, yeah, and it's so exciting that there's actually been this press release on Little Shop that Greg is
Greg's going to direct it. Yeah,
so exciting.
Mark Platt, who I was working, and Adam Siegel and Jared LaBeouf over at Platt Productions, and nobody knows musicals better than Mark Platt, the man who cashes all the Wicked checks.
Yeah, no kidding. Which is a great story in and of
and
itself.
about to be the Oscar-winning producer of La La Land, I should add.
Another great, beautiful film.
Yeah.
And Riverdale has this kind of magical quality of capturing an essence of musical theater, an essence of Twin Peaks, and of course Luke Perry of 90210. So this is a certain marriage for you of all these ingrained interests.
It's a dream come true. I really tortured both Roberto and David Rappaport, our casting director, when we were casting the pilot, because I insisted that he bring in everyone that had been on 90210 and everyone that had been on Twin Peaks. So that's how we found Machen and Luke. And Luke came in red and just was so good. And that, because it can't just be kitschy. It has to be good.
Absolutely. We talk about this a lot on previous podcasts, and we talk about it even more at the office. Machen is able to bring something that is, I think of as almost like a tornado into a room, and then on a dime can make her character so grounded and so believable in her actions that she can marry those worlds is a miracle. It's extremely difficult to do. And Luke, pilot episode, I mean, it is, for those of us who grew up watching 90210, it's great seeing Luke Perry on TV. But then he has this amazing heart-to-heart with Archie on the steps. And this isn't just stunt casting. This was a meant-to-be role for him.
It was... I just kind of wanted to see if there were if someone who had some of that baggage... Because it's something we also do on Supergirl. It's something we do on, on all the sort of DC shows as well, which is kind of to play, like Linda Carter being the president in Supergirl. It's the same kind of, it's a fun thing to do. And when they're when they're regulars, when they're the heart of the story, it's also, they just have to be great actors. And Luke really came in and broke our hearts auditioning that scene. And, the fact that he even auditions, he's the most grounded guy. He's such a sweet man. And he has a son who actually just started at UC Santa Cruz. And so I've watched him sort of like struggle with that and sending his kid to college. And he's such a good dad, and he's so proud of his kids. And he's watched his kids sort of grow up and become teenagers. And so he just has so much he can bring. He really relates to Fred. And he grew up, like, his family was in construction. It just sort of, it's very natural for him.
Amazing. All right, so to backtrack just a bit here, you have this relationship with Roberto, and he has this relationship with Archie Comics.
Well, I wanted to do the Riverdale, I wanted to do the Archie movie.
Right.
And so then it was sort of like, let's do it on television. What was exciting about that was there's so many, it's such I don't know if you've ever seen the sticker on the back of Roberto's cell phone. But it's a picture of all the characters in Riverdale. And it's huge. There's hundreds of people. So the idea that we'd ever really be able to do a great movie in 2 hours or 90 minutes was the opportunity of doing it in television. It just immediately clicked and it felt so right. And part of why Roberto even worked on Supergirl was just to sort of start being in the Berlanti camp so we could develop Riverdale. But truly the best, and Greg Berlanti says this, but like the best shows are when there is only one writer who could write them. Yeah. And there is no one else that could have done Riverdale besides Roberto. He grew up with these characters. They're his best friends.
Yeah, and it's amazing for someone who has that affinity to those characters, and for example, and then kind of put it on its ear a little bit and make it work in the most unexpected of ways. I grew up reading Archie comics and, picking them up at the grocery store, but, and there's something fun and simplistic, and they're for this kind of certain age group. So when I sat down and watched an early cut of the pilot almost a year ago, it's hard to imagine. It takes a moment for those who have a background of Archie to go, oh, this is different. But boy, you fall into the world, and it's every time you introduce a character from the comic books, it's like a really lovely little Easter egg that, Dilton Doily makes an appearance. You're like, oh, of course, Dilton Doily.
Yeah, and that's Roberto is like an encyclopedia of Archie comics, so he can pull all that stuff really easily. But it was a challenge. We first developed this for Fox, and I give them a lot of credit for helping us to kind of crack the story, because where we started off with, because Roberto has such, it was a process for Roberto and for all of us to get to this point where we could be more kind of subversive with these characters. We knew we wanted to tell a modern story that would appeal to modern audiences and didn't feel too old-fashioned, because that was what's great about Archie Comics is it has so many fans. It's a 75-year-old company. Those characters have generations of people have grown up with those characters, and that's remarkable and rare. And so to do it in television, I think at first we were really thinking of a more traditional take. It took us so long to find this kind of spine to the show. Like, I'm sure Roberto's told you, but there was a version where it was like, should Archie be running for mayor? And he's the youngest mayor. We went through many.
That's a break.
Oh, really?
I have not heard that version.
So that was sort of one of the early ones. And it took us a while to kind of to bring the Twin Peaks into it. And I use Twin Peaks. Look, nobody can do Twin Peaks but David Lynch. Like, I'm not, please, I worship at the altar of David Lynch. But what Twin Peaks did was it took an old-fashioned kind of world and it turned it on its head, and it treated teenagers like complicated adults. Yeah. And that, I think, and then there was the mystery of it. We always talk about in Blue Velvet, the opening of Blue Velvet, where you have like that blue sky and the green grass and the white picket fence. And then as you get closer, there's a severed ear. And right. that's sort of for my, and maybe because I grew up in the city, but that's always been my view of suburbia. It's like, is that buried severed ear? And so once we found that way of doing, which honors Riverdale as this sort of idealistic, wonderful place where we'd all want to have grown up. Yeah. But to let the reality of what it's like to be a teenager in 2017, which is a lot more complicated, and to bring that into it, I think is, it was a process to get there, but I'm really happy with where we ended up.
Oh, absolutely. And there is Roberto and I did speak on his interview about this sort of out-of-time quality that the show has in its look, in its set design, in its costume design. Mm-hmm. But you fall into it, and it's really exciting, and it challenges your expectations in the best possible way.
Yeah, I mean, I taught a class my senior year of college, which you can do when you go to like a hippie college, on teen movies. And I wrote my thesis on female coming of age during the rise of feminism. And so it's very sort of snotty theoretical approach to all of this. But at the same time, spending so much time teaching that class, what I really realized, and I taught it with my best friend Dylan, but like what we realized is that being a teenager is a really modern experience. Because to have that kind of period of time where you just get to try on personalities. I mean, you used to go to work at 12. And so to have this where you kind of figure out who you are, which frankly we're all doing our whole lives. But there's something about that period of time, and it's the first time you're experiencing all these things. And as we know, like the first time you experience anything is when it has the biggest impact on kind of who you are. And it's very... it's both universal and also very American, this whole idea of being a teenager and what it means. And so to be able to do a show that explores that. What's great about it is everyone's been a teenager.
Yeah.
And everyone's had like that awkwardness and that heartbreak and felt things so deeply, you know? When it's like when you grow up, your heart dies is from Breakfast Club.
Yeah.
And so it's really fun to do a show about people whose hearts are still beating.
And that's one of the charms that as just a viewer, I gravitate towards, is that in this world where we have a murder and there's all this mayhem and mystery going on, the individual issues are so relatable.
Yeah.
And either it's things I come across in my adult life or put me right back into being a 16-year-old in high school. So it's, it's great.
Well, and that's what it's like. So being a teenager is this very unique time, and yet we all are constantly teenagers, and we've all been and so there's what's great about Riverdale and the timelessness of it is that's an experience that people have had since Archie Comics has been around. You know, of what is it like to be a teenager and you have a crush and you want to drive and you want freedom, but you also love having your parents close, and that sort of in between that you're in. And also when you're a teenager, it's really scary. It's really intense and bad things happen. And I think that's also a really important thing. It is the death of innocence. It's the death of childhood. And so it feels that way a lot of times when you're a teenager. And so we wanted to honor that, the intensity of that experience. And because it is like, since Rebel Without a Cause, it's been, everyone has experienced this, that everyone is lucky enough not, to have their basic needs met and have shelter and food and education, has experienced this, And so drawing from the 75 years of Archie, both in terms of costumes, production design, our point is this is what it's like to be a teenager in 2017, but this is also what it was like to be a teenager in 1994. This is what it was like to be a teenager in 1984 and 74, and that's what's fun about the timelessness of it, is it doesn't feel, if you're 30, 40, 50, you can watch this and relate.
And it's interesting. The people who, in my personal life, who've come out of the woodwork and said, watching the show, love the show, you would think, well, there's a soap opera element, so 20-something, 30-something young women. Mm-hmm. That hasn't been my case at all. I mean, there are those people that love it, but all of my theater friends from back in New York love it. Older people, 50s, 60s years old, love it.
Yeah, my mom loves it.
Yeah. Because it's very relatable and the mystery engages you.
Yeah, and that's all really credit to Roberto and the writing staff for balancing all these elements. What it is it's like a real, those like the Olympics, people diving, like certain dives are like higher. Mm-hmm. You can get more points for them, but you could also screw up more, and that's really the people that make Riverdale are definitely diving off the high board. It's really a tricky to land all of these things. Yeah. It's like a gymnastics routine or something. And so we're really proud of the show, though. I think it's I love it.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the challenges of getting a pilot made.
It's so hard. I'm in the middle of doing it right now.
All right. Not the pilots you're currently in the process of, which is very exciting. Berlanti Productions has 4 pilots going into the next year. Yeah. You say with a cold sweat.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is super exciting.
We have 4 shows. We have 1 cast.
I know, crazy.
But so Riverdale making the pilot after, was this like sort of 2-year process of working on the script and keeping Roberto and Supergirl so he wouldn't go off and do something else so that we could make this happen. And then going on and pitching it again. But we had the script at that point, and Roberto is such an excellent writer. And so the script was so good. And Greg's feeling all along was, this script is excellent. This script is undeniable. It will get made because it's so good. And that happens. He's seen it. He's been in the television business for 20 years. And it's sort of like, if something's really good, this good, it will get made. And so he had a lot of faith, even when Roberto and I would get really worried that it was never going to happen. And then the CW came, stepped up, and it made a lot of sense. It's kind of where we thought we'd be in the first place. And they, they had really smart notes just about deepening some of the parents And then we set out to make it. We had to find a director and a cast. And that's really everything, is the cast. I mean, you need a great script. You need a great cast. And then if you have a great crew and a great director, all that's great. But we need that cast because that's who people are inviting into their homes week after week. So it was a long, arduous process to find and assemble this cast.
Well, especially when you consider that the key members, the kids, with the exception of Cole Sprouse, are all newcomers.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have the pedigree of saying, "Oh, here's someone who already attracts an audience," which is what a studio wants.
Cole, to his credit, hadn't acted in years. I mean, because he went and got a college education. He lived his life. He kind of figured out who he was. And, he said coming back to audition for Riverdale, because he did audition, was the first time he had sort of chosen to pursue acting in a really long time.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And he's obviously amazing. The whole cast it was a lot of looking, and I kind of remember finding each one of them. And I remember when Luke auditioned, and it was just sort of like, well, that's done. And Machen, I was convinced of before some of the other people on the team.
Sure.
I knew it. And then Marisol was actually really easy. She sort of came in and we're like, yep, that's Hermione. And then Lily we found first.
Of the kids.
Yeah, and CW still does this thing where they do live auditions. So the actors come in and perform the scenes in this like tiny theater. It looks like a it looks like a theater on Santa Monica Boulevard. You know that little strip?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's this little black box, and these poor kids have to come in and do it live. It's really the moment of all the moments. The two moments when I feel the worst for actors are when I'm walking into a casting session, I see them all sitting in the hallways, and then when they have to go and do this. But
yeah.
And so Lily she was great, and she was Betty, and that was probably the easiest one. And then finding Camilla was harder. Finding Archie was the hardest. Cole was also the easy. Cole, we knew, that's the guy. And he performed so well live, and he really got what it was about. And he's very Jughead in a lot of ways. He's very funny, and he has his own sort of view on the world, but he locked into it and he understood it. And so those were the easiest. And then finding Camilla was like still at NYU. We kept flying her back to audition. And then I remember at one point Roberto's like, I'm like, put some pearls on her. And he's like, oh, I see it now. It's like that. It's but she was fantastic. And with her it was just a little scarier because she had no body of work. Lily, she had done she had a reel. She'd been in movies. Right. There was stuff to point to. And Camilla just won the job. And then the other one was Madeline, who
gosh,
she's incredible.
She is. I keep waiting for the rest of the world to open up the book on Madeline, because when it happens, everything's going to stop. It's amazing.
My God, she's fantastic. She worked so hard for the part and was so focused on it. And, she even had to do the live audition. And then the CW's like, can she come back in and do it again? And it was just like, it was so tough. Like, she really killed herself to do it. And I'll be honest, she's the sweetest person. She's really hardworking. I remember she couldn't go to this Golden Globes party because she had to work the next day. And she's like, I'd rather be at work. And she would. She's just hardworking. She's her head screwed on straight, and her performance is phenomenal. In the pilot, when she's crying, looking at pictures of Jason, she just did that take after take. She put on her headphones and just focused, and she's a remarkably skilled actress. And again, it just didn't have that big body of work to point to.
Right.
And then she also was intimidating to me, which I thought was a good sign for Cheryl.
Yeah.
I was like, she kind of scares me, and that's good. But she's a sweetheart, and she and Lily are roommates, and they're really good people.
She has a quality that I've mentioned probably in every podcast, because it's amazing to me. She's able to convey so many adverse emotions within 3 seconds.
It's like Machen, really. I mean, those two are similar, and
Very
it's
much
clearly
so.
it's a kind of character that Roberto relishes.
Yes.
Writing, and it's sort of his love of old Hollywood, and it's like Betty Davis back in the day.
Absolutely.
It's really or Joan Crawford, and she can bring the comedy and the heart, and even when Cheryl's being ridiculous, Cheryl is truthful to Cheryl.
Yeah.
And that is a real feat. And I give Madeline a lot of credit for that. And then, of course, the hardest was Archie. At a certain point, I was afraid we weren't going to be able to make the pilot because we just didn't have Archie yet. And KJ had come to town, and KJ's old agent, Megan Silverman, called me and said, "You've got to meet this kid. I found your Archie." And I sat down with him. He had black hair. He was like tan. And I was like, maybe. And the first question he asked me is, "Will I have to dye my hair?" And I was like, "Yes."
In his thick New Zealand accent,
yes,
I imagine.
Yes, yeah. And I was like, I don't know if this kid can do it. Like, I don't know. And then he came in and read, and it was really like, thank God. Because there had been a couple other actors and talented actors. It's really hard. Pilot season, you have to find a really amazing actor that can do this week in and week out, that has a little bit of that character inside of them that they can access. It gives it that truthfulness. And he just had that exuberance. And I remember when he was just like this relief. And what happened actually, and this is David Rappaport, KJ auditioned and it wasn't good. It was his first audition getting off the plane. I actually have never seen it, so I don't know if David said it isn't good. I'm sure it was perfect, KJ. And so I remember going, "What happened to the kid from New Zealand that Megan sent me?" Like, and David was like, "Eh." And David, to his credit, we were struggling with bringing all these kids, really talented kids, but just not quite Archie. Yeah. And he brought KJ back in, and he's like, "I want to give him another shot." And it was like night and day. I think he'd just gotten off a plane, and he was fantastic. And I remembered his audition at the CW. He played like a rock. Eddie Van Halen is like his hero. And he played like a really rock and roll version of Mary Had a Little Lamb. And just everybody in the room was like in love with him. Done. That was amazing. It. And it was just no question. And it's that thing where you trust your instincts because you're like, well, maybe this guy could do it. Or maybe I don't know. And you try and talk yourself into all this stuff. And then I've really had this experience on Riverdale. But I think all of our shows at work, you have this feeling with the casting where you're just so excited and you're like, that's it. That's the one.
Couldn't have been any other way.
No. Like Melissa Benoist and Supergirl. I was like, yep, totally. She's Supergirl.
Absolutely. Yeah, and people may not know that KJ absolutely plays excellent guitar.
Excellent.
And sings well.
Yeah. No, all the singing is him. Yeah. And then... and Ashley was also, who plays Josie, she was so adorable. She came to audition, she had like a rolly suitcase that she had like walked like a mile dragging to the audition, and she just blew everyone away. And she just reminded me of like a young Whitney Houston. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think she also, just because, not to give myself too much credit, she sang How Will I Know? So that's probably why. I'll give Ashley the credit for making that connection.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. The amount of passion that these kids have, and what they're able to do with these characters. Because as we introduce all of the kids, they're on, from the pilot up into the first 4 episodes, they're on the precipice of major life changes and decisions that they've never had to make before. So be able to have an actor that can, Archie is kind of tortured.
Yeah.
But
sweet and good. And that's, I mean, KJ's not a tortured soul from what I can tell of him. I'm not his therapist. I don't know, but he's really exuberant, and he is like that sort of, I don't know, it's a kind of man that they grow down there. Right. In Australia and New Zealand that are just like men, but he's just a sweet, kind, exuberant soul.
There you go. Single ladies, if you're looking for men, New Zealand.
Yeah, absolutely. Or Australia. I mean, the Hemsworths. I mean, that's where they all come from.
They grow them big.
They do.
So you make the pilot. At what point pilots can go a lot of different ways. And I know you've had that experience where it feels like it's meant to be, or other times it comes right off the rails. At what point do you feel like this is a show that's going to be picked up?
I mean, you never know, and you're super nervous. But Lietl and Krieger did such a great job. I remember sitting on set when we were sitting on a boat in the freezing cold. We were doing the shot of Madeline crying with the police, that sort of like Wes Anderson police captain on the boat. And I was just like, how does this not get picked up? Like, this is beautiful. This is so good. Yeah. I can't imagine. And, and it was a specific tone, and we're so lucky that Lee just completely got it and did an amazing job. And so we knew the pilot was great. And then, but by the way, Hollywood is not a meritocracy. That is something I learned very early. And so you still are incredibly worried until you get that call. But it felt like, Grego, it's a sort of thing of like, just stay in your lane, focus on what you can control. And I think Roberto wrote an incredible script. We put together like the best possible cast, and Lee did a great job directing it, and it came together really well. So it's sort of like, I don't, what else can we do? Yeah. But it still feels like you're waiting for your lottery number to get picked.
And that sort of, even when it goes to air, and then it rolls out and you're waiting for people to kind of catch on, you're still kind of waiting for your lottery number to get picked.
That is like the worst part of television. The most fun is you get to like keep making these stories. The worst part is you keep getting judged on them. Like with movies, it's like opening weekend and then but this, it's like every week you have to check the ratings and the this and that. But I've got to say, like, the thing that's been the most fun for me is basically just reading Twitter during the episodes.
Absolutely.
And just everyone's response. It's so much fun.
So we do the podcast as most everyone else on the show does. We live tweet the East Coast feed, which we'll be doing this evening.
Such a good episode.
But
it's our homage to the Last Picture Show, which many people will not understand, but you should go watch it.
Absolutely. It's also fantastic. Peter Bogdanovich.
Yep.
Great film. But
a gorgeous young Sybil Shepherd.
Yeah.
And a very handsome actor named Timothy Bottoms, who when I first saw Last Picture Show, I was like, that's my husband. And then I was like, he's 50 now. Oh, sorry, bad words.
That's okay.
And edit that out.
That's all right. But the live tweeting is amazing because we see everyone who's hashtagging Riverdale during it, and it's flying by on our screen so fast you can barely read it. So we know people are into it. What's challenging right now, and I'm sure you can relate to, or I'm sure it's challenging for you as well, is that it used to be you would do a television show. The next day you could actually see what your ratings are, and that was a fairly solid estimation of how many people are tuning in. Now, so many people watch it on DVR in 3 days, more than 3 days.
On the CW app?
On the CW app. Everywhere outside of the States, they're watching it on Netflix, which doesn't reveal numbers, which is fine.
By the way, now I'm like, oh, great. I don't want to know the number. You keep it to yourself. Yeah.
So that's interesting. So it's less stress not knowing.
Look, there's things you can control. There's things you can't control. Ratings you can't control. Also, the whole rating system to me is kind of crazy with the 20,000. It's basically 20,000 families. So I don't know. I feel like if we're intercepting phone calls that Michael Flynn is having with Russian ambassadors, we could probably figure out who's watching what on their DVRs. But, I don't know.
Interesting. That's
Sorry, I have to get a Trump reference into anything
correlation. I do. That's wonderful.
But look, I think it's like, forget about the numbers. You get a sense of if something is in the zeitgeist and if people are connecting to it. And it's like seeing Archie, Entertainment Weekly has been really supportive.
Absolutely.
Seeing the reaction online, seeing the fans, seeing the GIFs. I mean, I just love it. I love that interaction because that's what's so great about television is you make something and then you get to interact with the people watching it. And it's just so obvious to me that people care. And that's the best. The worst thing is to work really hard on something and people are indifferent. And so this has been really exciting and gratifying. And
from the top, people, this was a great find for Warner Brothers and the CW. Mark Pedowitz talks at the TCA about how this is possibly the beginning of a Riverdale universe. How do you guys feel about that?
That would be great. I mean, I think you just put one foot in front of the other.
Sure.
And just try and make one great episode, one great season, one great show. And then if more comes, then great. What's fun about Riverdale is and it's purposely called Riverdale, not Archie, because it is about this sort of universe is, it'd be so fun to do a Sabrina show in the same kind of, with the same tonal, that modern retro feel. But we'll see. We're just happy to make anything and happy that people like it.
Well, I think we're off to the races here. It's a really fun show that people are clearly engaged with. The other thing I'll just say,
please do. Something I'm really proud of, and I'm proud of Roberto and the writing staff, and Warner Brothers and the CW is we've done this sort of timeless, out-of-time show, but it's really relevant and it's really modern, and I'm really proud of that. And I think it's true on Supergirl and on all of our shows. But, you know, and to take on slut-shaming, to talk about, like, white men wanting to be the voice of African-American women, talking about privilege, talking about all these issues, to me it's been so fun, because I do feel like teenagers today are so beyond these kind of hang-ups that adults have had. I mean, they're like, you know, they're all bisexual. They're all like, you know, it's like none of that stuff matters to them, which is great and pure and true and right. And so to be able to reflect that, I think it's really exciting for us.
Absolutely. And you're right. It shows, you know, we recorded a podcast yesterday where we got into chapter 4 that airs this evening. And one of the things that we talked about, which is this sort of wonderful relationship between Kevin Keller and his father, where Kevin is gay and his father is beyond understanding what that means. Yeah. He's just his son who happens to be gay. And it's so commonplace, and it's great that we are working on a TV show that imagines a relationship where it's not a big deal. It's not a thing.
No, and there's been beautiful exploration. Like, I thought Glee in its first season handled that gay son-father relationship so masterfully.
Absolutely.
And so you look at what's been done, it's like, how do you do something different? And something that's both aspirational and feels true. And in thinking about that relationship, was it just a don't ask, don't tell? Right. It was kind of where we started. But then it's sort of like, yeah, it's his kid. And like, who cares? You don't want your straight or gay son cruising. But besides that, I think, you know, it's the same. But yeah, I think that's been great. And those are purposeful and all those kind of choices.
Yeah. And even the Betty and Veronica kiss in the pilot, which is, of course, you're like, and then Cheryl's reaction to it being very, well, that would have been a big deal 15 years ago.
We had to trim it. We had so many good, like that hasn't been taboo since Madonna kissed Britney. And, like, they got so specific, like, since, you know, was it Heather? What was the 94? Like, anyway, we had all these like specific cultural references, and then it was just got like so long. But she killed it. She does a real good deadpan. But yeah, it's like you want to play with all that stuff. I think the other thing about Riverdale, which is probably fun in terms of doing a podcast and thinking about it, is it's really meta.
Oh, totally.
And that's like, that has been the fun part of putting it together with the Luke and Machen, and having Molly Ringwald come in as Archie's dad, which is like my dream come true.
Amazing.
And playing with all that stuff and some of the music choices and all that, there is a self-awareness, which I think in this day and age, if you can't just be earnest, doesn't work. I think you have to be aware. Yep. And the world is a connected place, and there's a lot happening. And so I think we really want to play with that stuff and play with the kind of conventions of the shows that have come before us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it's like, instead of the prom queen, it's the quarterback. It's like we're having fun with that stuff in a very, we're thoughtful way.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. Molly Ringwald being back on television and being back in our lives, it's, for us of a certain age, it's so great.
Really big deal. Yeah.
Super exciting.
I really threw the gauntlet on that one. I was like, please, 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 please.
How much convincing did it take her? You guys went to her directly?
Oh, she was fine. It was just convincing everyone else. It's like, it's that you want to balance it. You don't want to, but she's been great she's great on the show. And it's like the second whatever, I don't want to give away. I don't know when this is going to be, but when she shows up, it's pretty awesome.
Well, this is super exciting. Sarah, thank you so much for sitting down with us.
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you for liking the show, both to you and your audience.
Absolutely.
Keep watching. It just gets better and better.
It does. It does. Well, that does it for this very special episode. Remember, keep watching.
Not that special.
Super special, Sarah.
All right.
Keep watching Riverdale. It's on the CW network Thursday nights at 9 o'clock. Until next time, hashtag Riverdale Strong.
Yeah.
Sugar, oh honey, you are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you, honey, oh sugar. just can't believe the loveliness of loving you. I just can't believe it's true. I just can't believe the wonder of this feeling too. I just can't believe it's true. Ah, sugar. Oh, honey, honey. You are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you. Oh, honey. Oh, sugar, sugar. You are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you. When I kissed you, girl, I knew how sweet a kiss could be. I know how sweet a kiss can be. Like the summer sunshine, pour your sweetness over me. Pour your sweetness over me. Oh, sugar, sugar on it, honey. Pour your sugar on it, baby.
Life's so sweet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Pour your sugar on it. Oh, yeah. Pour your sugar on it, honey. Pour your sugar on it, baby.
I'm gonna make life so sweet.
Yeah, yeah. Pour your sugar on it, honey. Ah, sugar. Honey, honey. You are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you.
Rick, move your head.